I think legislation and regulations are having a much bigger impact. I've seen a figure, something on the order of 42% of the cost of building a unit. Either they paid their rent, or they made an agreement to pay their rent, or they turned in their keys and said, I can't pay the rent. Very few people tried to stay in place and say, screw you. We attribute that to really, 25, 30 years of treating people with respect and treating people right. And, if depending on where you are in the market, whether it's an affordable level or a mid-market, a BC property or an A property, people are just going to shift around. The affordable market is always going to create a bottom to the market. Whatever the affordable housing dollar is, that's going to be the bottom.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Multifamily Hangout podcast. We're live again in our virtual studio right here. I'm your host, Adrian and Danila. I want to start by thanking our sponsors for making this broadcast possible. They are Kairos and Coastal Painting Contractors. I want to turn it over to my co-host to introduce our esteemed guest today, Chris Moreno. Take it away, sir.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone, for coming. Love to hear in the comments where you all are from. Here today in beautiful Atlanta, Georgia, where it's finally cooling down. And our guests today are coming to us from wonderful New York State. This is our first time doing a father and son duo from the ownership and management side, and also prop tech side. So really excited to have Dave and Jesse Holland today in the studio. Got a ton of experience in the property management industry. First, we'll start with Dave. A lot of industry experience, over 8 years in thriving communities, driving operational and efficiencies. The company is Sunrise Management and Consulting. He joined there in 2016 and was really instrumental in setting a lot of resident retention, looking at data, looking at property performance. He co-founded Property Gauge, and a lot of the focus there was based on their knowledge of delivering innovative SaaS solutions, and we'll dive into that a bit more. Dave have also served as the 2023 to 2024 president of the IREM New York Capital Region Manager. So a lot of leadership experience. We'll dive into that. And he was a finalist for the prestigious 2024 IREM Ream Award. So we want to hear a little bit about that as we dive in. Secondarily, welcome Jesse, president and founder of Sunrise Management and Consulting, with over 35 years of real estate management to the table. And he spent a lot of time on the strategic direction, growing the organization and opportunities. And his credentials include being a licensed real estate broker in New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Massachusetts, and then also as an IREM accredited resident manager and certified property manager. Just a ton of experience in IREM. I think we can dive in because you have such an incredible experience. I want to dive in and hear you guys talk about it and some of the things you're working on. But welcome to the podcast, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Glad to be here.
Great to have you. The first question we ask, and with a father-son duo, first time we're doing this, feel free to go first, whoever wants to go first, but like to hear how you fell into it. And Dave, did you fall into it from your father? Did you fall into it from someone else? How did you guys get into this business initially? Maybe we'll start with Jesse to hear your story.
Oh, well, when I was at Cornell University quite a while ago, I bought a 4-family house with my father, and I lived in one unit and got the taste of it there. And about 3 weeks before graduation, I was in a seniors only class, and the professor said, who's got a job after graduation? And 2 of us raised our hands, and I was lying. So nobody could get a job. So I went into business doing property management right from the get-go, moved from Ithaca to Albany and threw out my shingle, and took many years to grow and made many mistakes. First starting in the small side 2 and 3 family houses, and eventually in 1998 moving to the larger side where we took over a 256 unit apartment complex, which we still manage today, and have grown from there.
So I came to join the family business 2016. I was living in the South. I was in Virginia, actually. And my brother decided that he was going to join the family business. And Jesse, my dad, called me and said, hey, your brother's joining up, so you should come too. And I said, okay. So I came and just kind of figured out property management. I actually started on the maintenance team. And after about 2 weeks, pretty much everybody said I should not be on the maintenance team. So they were kind enough to move me into the office. And I did a summer as a leasing agent, and then assistant manager, and then manager. And a couple of years ago, we hit upon an interesting idea, which then eventually became Property Gauge, which is a SaaS service. So now I've flipped over from the operator side to the supplier side, and I'm kind of playing with that fun angle. So here we are.
Impressive journeys, gentlemen. My first question is going to be for Jesse. Jesse, with your extensive experience spanning over 35 years in real estate and multifamily, how do you compare the current multifamily real estate market to previous cycles? What strategies have you seen succeed in past downturns that might be applicable today?
Well, it's certainly an interesting time right now. I think you've got a lot of factors pulling in many different directions. I think there's still an effect from the pandemic, and those issues, some supply chain issues. Obviously, the rise in interest rates and inflation and all those types of things have an effect on it. But I think we also have a lot more information now, and a lot more quickly. So that if you look at the real estate cycles, I think the amount of time has contracted. So you might have had a 7 or 8 year cycle in the past, and now it's becoming a 3 or 4 year cycle. But the ups and downs are, the highs and lows are also moderating. So the wave has a lower amplitude. If you think about it, even like the car industry. It used to be you'd go and buy a car, and 2 months later, the bookkeepers and accountants would figure out, what they sold, and then they would increase the supply chain, or, increase the product line, or decrease the volume. Now you buy a car at 9 a.m. and by 10 a.m. they've already put it into their inventory and, adjusted if they sold enough cars or they didn't sell enough cars. So information's moving faster. And that's causing the cycles to change and having to be able to react very, very quickly to the market changes.
Going back, what you're seeing happening in a current environment and in a near future, from shortening the cycles, right? Keeping that in mind, what are some things that you see happening that might be this time different than the previous downturn cycles? I
think legislation and regulations are having a much bigger impact. I've seen a figure, something on the order of 42% of the cost of building a unit is now in response to a regulatory requirement. So obviously that's pushing up costs, which eventually pushes up rents and valuations. So even New York State just passed new good cause eviction law, which is requiring all kinds of notices and changes. So the regulatory environment seems to be changing things faster, and you really are at peril if you're not paying attention to that type of thing. If you're not following the laws, you're being held to a higher standard. 20, 30 years ago, it was tenants and toilets. And, here's an apartment. If you like it, great. If you don't, there's somebody else. And we spent a lot of time processing things and, shuffling paper. Now we don't even have paper, and processes are being done automatically. And what our secret sauce has been is really working on the relationship with our residents and the community. But, how do we deliver a high quality customer service experience regardless of what class of property it is? We did particularly well through the pandemic. In that 99% of our tenant base of over 1,000 units did the right thing. Either they paid their rent, or they made an agreement to pay their rent, or they turned in their keys and said, I can't pay the rent. Very few people tried to stay in place and say, screw you. We attribute that to really, 25, 30 years of treating people with respect and treating people right, and high class customer service. So we weren't the enemy. We were all a team in how we got through the pandemic.
I'll jump over to Dave. As we're talking about leadership in real estate, could you share for those maybe in the audience who don't know about IREM, why you're excited about IREM, maybe your position as president of IREM in New York, and maybe some of the things you're focused on, right now?
Absolutely. So IREM is the Institute of Real Estate Management. It's a worldwide organization. There's about 20,000 members worldwide. There's 68 chapters throughout the U.S. We actually have 3 chapters here in New York State, New York City. There's the Capital Region, and then there's the Western New York, the Rochester chapter. So I encourage you, if you're not already involved, to go to IREM.org and you can do the find a chapter search and find a local chapter near you and get involved. IREM is big on education and networking, right? There's the accreditations that you can earn, the accredited residential manager, certified property manager, accredited commercial office manager. Those are all for the individual. And there's also an accreditation for the management company, the
Accredited Management Organization,
the AMO, which Sunrise Management Consulting is. And then there's some for the properties, like certified sustainable property and so on. And the goal is to have a professional, ethical operator throughout, raising the standards for the industry. So they do a lot of work around best practices and education and ethics and trying to make sure that we're all speaking the high bar ethical language that a good operator should be, which is, I resonate with that. And as far as the New York Capital Region chapter, we have roughly 120-ish members or so. But our members represent 49 different companies, and we all come together to learn and grow from each other, and also just to be friends. Some of my best friends are on committees and boards. We just get to do cool stuff together, and it's a cool way to be involved in the industry. And the networking is top notch.
And I think
Awesome.
a lot of people don't understand how to use a trade organization to their benefit. I've been blessed to get involved both at the local level and the national level. I was chapter president a number of years ago, and then I was a regional vice president. I've served on a number of different communities on a national level, including the ethics committee, the as a governing counselor, the industry standards board, the audit committee. So you learn about working with people in those committees. You learn about how a big organization runs. Pretty much I know somebody who knows somebody just about everywhere. And when I have a problem or a situation or something I haven't seen before or maybe trying new, I can reach out to my network and say, hey, what do I do? Or what have you done with this? A great example we had in 2011, Hurricane Irene hit upstate New York, and we had a 192 unit apartment complex that was evacuated for 3 days, and 4 buildings, 32 units that were literally underwater, about 2-3 feet of water. So for 3 days, nobody could get into their apartments. We had to deal with all that, and we had a huge checklist and a huge, what are we going to do, and how do we approach this? One of those calls was to some of my IREM network. Hey, is there anything I missed? And one person came up with, order dumpsters. Like, what do we need dumpsters for? I said, don't worry, you're going to need them. Get as many 40-yard roll-offs as you can get, because after 3 days, every single apartment is going to have to dump all the food in their refrigerator. And those 32 units that are underwater, everything's going in the garbage. So we were the first call, and we got like 8 dumpsters on site. And literally 2 weeks later, with all this chaos going on, we had people coming to rent apartments, not even realizing that we had flooded, and thought that we were just in the middle of a renovation. And when you went elsewhere around the area, and I'm sure you've seen the pictures of areas that are flooded, there's just massive piles of garbage in front of every building because they have nowhere to put it. And we were able to avoid that. And we were able to avoid that because of the connections and the people I was able to call and said, hey, here's the piece you missed. Here's the piece you haven't dealt with.
Jesse, I want to stay with you a little bit and bring a little context. In a current environment with, we're fighting inflation, low supply of housing because of the regulations that you just mentioned, 42 cents of each dollar go to regulation instead into the buildings themselves. With all of that, makes it difficult for residents to, to keep up with their rent. I'm a small owner myself, and I'm seeing like them being devastated by inflation. Their savings are being depleted, and I had to drop like requirements down to where it's not 3 times the income for you to qualify, because there's just virtually no one that could make that much or like deposit and things like that. I'm sure that you're seeing similar trends out there in upstate New York. So what are some things that you do to help your company go over this bump, ride this wave? And secondly, I want to ask you, what are some particular initiatives that you are focusing on currently at Sunrise Management to stay ahead of the market trends?
So realize that when you have market stress like this, it's hitting different parts of the market in different ways. If depending on where you are in the market, whether it's an affordable level or a mid-market, a BC property or an A property, people are just going to shift around. The affordable market is always going to create a bottom to the market. Whatever the affordable housing dollar is, that's going to be the bottom. And when things shift like that, the place that's going to have the most effect is usually the very top of the market, the AAA product. Because if you're renting a $5,000 a month apartment, you can always find a $4,000 a month apartment if you don't have $5,000 anymore. It may not be what you like. It may be smaller. It may be farther away. It may not have the amenities, but you can pay less money. It's just a matter of changing your expectations as a tenant as to what you can afford. So if the top A's become the low A's and the low A's become the B's and the B's become the C's, and affordable is keeping it at the bottom, you still have a place to go. You just have to change. The tenant has to change their expectations. And in times of distress, probably the best thing you can do is to maintain your standards or as close to your standards as possible, because putting somebody in an apartment they can't afford is no help to you and it's no help to them. They're just going to struggle. They're just going to end up in an eviction or piling on the debt, and nobody got helped and nobody won. We would rather see somebody come to us and say, hey, I can't afford my apartment, and let them out of the lease and let them find someplace that's financially right sized for them, than to try and hold them in a lease and spend all kinds of fees on legal fees and all that type of stuff. So in order to be able to do that, you have to have all the other pieces working properly. So do you have a good marketing program? Are you targeting the right people? Are you doing the right outreach efforts? Are you delivering the proper customer service? Are you showing them value for what they're buying? Yes, there's always people who are just they're over their head, but typically, that's not somebody who's first moving into an apartment. If you rent to somebody who's only got 2 times the income and a car payment, they're not going to be okay. There's just too many things happen. Life happens. So you're better off at the end of the day, either sitting with the vacancy, changing your approach to the market, helping people to maybe double up. So maybe 2 people who were in 1 bedrooms before now share a 2-bedroom and they're both paying a little bit less money. And typically that's what we see as prices tighten, as recessions happen, the 2 and 3 bedroom units become more popular and the 1 bedrooms become harder because 2 or 3 people in their own 1 bedroom now go share an apartment.
It's interesting how you see the ebbs and flows, especially during COVID, right?
Yep.
A lot of people moving back home, sharing units, and now obviously post-COVID, then move back out to markets. Kind of curious from like an innovative standpoint. Obviously you've been on the operations side, you've seen the challenges, you've felt them with the residents, focused a lot on retention at Sunrise. You've focused on a lot of innovation, but actually founding a company is a big shift. There's a big difference between like advising, helping, but then literally jumping in the driver's seat and founding it. So can you share a little bit more about why, like what that looked like, and then how you spend your time there?
So I assume we're talking about Property Gauge as opposed to Sunrise.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you could share about Sunrise too, but yeah, really thinking of going from the Sunrise side to the Property Gauge side.
Property Gauge grew out of an issue that I was dealing with, and as a small company owner, you're sort of wearing many hats and watching everything. Constantly scanning the world, scanning your world, to see if everything's happening and the right things are happening, and trying to catch mistakes and not have little mistakes become big mistakes and not have things blow up. So after years of doing this and David and my other son, Adam, joined the company, I basically said to Adam, I'm tired of doing all of this. I want you to start monitoring this stuff. And Adam is sort of techie science background, more of an engineering mindset. And he very quickly said, I would happy to do that. What do you want me to watch? And I said, everything. And he said, that's not an answer. I said, I got to know what to look at. I can't just watch everything. So we spent a lot of time creating a spreadsheet of all of the things that I'm constantly looking at, trying to make sure the right things are happening. He was then able to take that spreadsheet and connect it into the back end data source of the software we're using, the property management software, so that instead of people having to do reports and mark up those reports and send in those reports, and then those reports are getting evaluated, it was all coming automatically, and we could very quickly see where the problems were. We were able to color code it, red, yellow, green, set standards, and say, here's where a problem was. And it took us a long time. And this is where David really came in. The industry is very focused on trailing indicators. So an income statement is a trailing indicator. It already happened. You can't change it. We were looking for leading indicators. How do I know that the right things are going to happen? And David was our sort of our test dummy at one of our larger properties. He was comfortable enough with the tech and secure enough to be able to look at it and not tell the boss, hey, everything's wonderful, and actually give us feedback and tell us how to tweak things and how he would use it and his response. So, for example, one of the things we found was, everybody looks at collections, right? That's an important piece of the puzzle. Everybody has their standard 30, 60, 90-day accounts receivable report. People don't pay, put them in for eviction. That's, sort of the standard. I always looked at it as, I can't control whether people pay or not. I can only control that we do the right thing. So if they didn't pay the rent, on this date, you get a late notice. On this day, you get a 14-day notice. On this date, it goes to the attorney. So I'm worried, did we do those things on those days? And we even, especially through the pandemic, I think we did a little bit before the pandemic, we even changed our approach. So when somebody was delinquent on the rent, we didn't call them up and say, hey, your rent's late. We called them up and said, hey, is everything okay? They're like, yeah, everything's fine. Okay. Because we noticed you didn't pay your rent this month. We wanted to make sure everything was all right. And it really changed. And, David was the guy making those phone calls. Yeah. So, it really changes the tenure of the conversation and allows us to head off that eviction, because we're dealing with it, in the first 10 days that they're late, not 3 months later. But we realized, as we started gathering all this data, that some of our managers were really good about putting notes into the system on everybody who was delinquent. And some managers were not so good at that. So when we started tracking that, we found that the managers who put the notes in all had better collection records than the managers who didn't put the notes in. Not rocket science. So we started, and I think we even honed it down that if the notes were refreshed every 10 days or within every 10 days, that somebody was paying attention to it. So we started tracking that. What percentage of delinquent tenants have notes and have notes refreshed within every 10 days? And then that massively changed our collections, because now that we knew the managers were making notes, and we knew, so theoretically, they were making the calls and they were making the notes, or they were knocking on doors or whatever they needed to do. And, the squeaky wheel gets the grease in collections. So it drastically changed our collections. The ones that ended up going to an eviction, wasn't much we could do about that. But the ones who, were having a problem, were going to be a little bit late, we were now right on top of it, and we could control the action, because we were making sure the activity was happening before it became a big problem. And that's, what Property Gauge, that was just one tiny piece of what the precursor to Property Gauge was doing, and now what, Property Gauge does for us to be able to be proactive in our management and to focus in the right place. Because, you look at a delinquency report on 1,000 tenants, that's 30, 40 pages. Now go find the guy who's late, find the note or when the last note was. None of the software systems are designed to sort things like that. You're either into spreadsheets and downloading stuff and sorting stuff. Now you got a much higher technology need, tech level than your average property manager or assistant manager. This just brings you right to it, and that's how it's helped us. And when we started showing this to people, and I think David was the first one, I'll let him tell the story of our sort of our test marketing.
So I was actually at an IREM conference. I was in Chicago. This was a couple of years ago. And one of my board members had stepped aside from the event that we were at. And she was like hand tallying, how many calls, how many leads, how many showings had come in the day before. And I was like, what are you doing? And she said, oh, this is how we do it. My company is 5,000 units, and every day, every one of the properties, 50 properties, we all send in an Excel sheet that's typed up of all the tally marks of all the people that came and called and showed up yesterday, applications that came in. And then the regional manager compiles all 50 of the spreadsheets, and then they send it to the marketing person who compiles all of those spreadsheets and matches them up with the invoices from the ILSs and tries to tease out and we get a good value per lead. And I was like, that's a lot of work. That's a lot of just manual, just moving information around that the whole company is doing every single day. We haven't done that in 2 years, right? Our company is the fifth of the size of yours. And she's like, show me what you're doing. So, she looked at our stuff and pretty shortly after their company called and they're like, hey, can we buy a version of this? And we were like, I guess, right? It's not for sale, but sure, we'll make you a copy of it. And, we took their data, put it into our fancy spreadsheet, because that's all it was at the time, and showed it to their regional manager team. And one of the regional managers fell out of his chair when we were looking at lease renewals, because we found that one of their managers 6 months ago was sending out lease renewal offers. Obviously, they were sending, dozens or hundreds of them, but a couple of them, the rent was going down upon renewal. And it turned out the company was pushing occupancy so hard that they didn't notice when the manager was lowering the rent upon renewal to keep the place occupied. And we were like, dude, this is your data. We're just showing it back to you. It was right here the whole time. And it's like, well, it was lost. There's such a big pile of data. How do you find the needle in the haystack, right? So that's what Property Gauge does. It just picks out the actionable items and says, here's the problem. Go.
Here's where to focus.
Go.
And we talked to some of our some colleagues who were in the software industry who said they really, one was a small angel investor, and he said, I think you really got something here, and added in some tech guys who actually knew the tech side of the world, and
software.
Here we are.
And now a word from Dean Fungawing, founder and CEO, Kairos.
This first customer where we installed this solution for, we installed on January 4th this year. And within 3 weeks, the temperatures of the attic had gotten below 40, immediately sent a notification to the chief building engineer. They saw that the temperatures that night, according to the weather forecast, were going to drop into the 20s, low 20s. Well, sure enough, the ambient sensor could tell that the attic was dropping very fast, within hours. Down to 32 degrees. And that night it had gotten down to 20 degrees. Well, luckily for them, they went on fire watch. Once they saw the temperatures were approaching freezing, they could drain the lines of the system. And that way there was no risk to the asset. And they just had to pay for a little bit of overtime for somebody to walk the building every 45 minutes. In the morning, when the temperatures start to rise, they could turn the system back on and go back off of fire watch, right? This happened multiple nights in a row. And one of the nights they actually caught a crack in one of the lines, the leak sensor. They were able to detect that there was a small crack in one of the lines from it just being an old line. And they only had to pay $3,000 for a specialized plumber to come and fix that line, but they didn't have any damage. Last year, over $300,000 worth of damage because of the apartments flooding. Same building, same issue. The following year, zero water damage. And the only difference was they knew what the temperature of the pipes were. And that's it, right? Once you know, then you can act and be responsible.
Dave, my next question is for you. Being on both the operator side and also the tech creator side, the person that creates the tech that the operator is using. If I'm an operator, what are some best pieces of advice for me that you could suggest when I'm looking to purchase technology?
Sure.
What are some things to look for? how do I vet technology in the best way possible?
So I think the first place you have to start is, what's the problem I'm trying to solve, right? Because if you get distracted by some shiny new technology and then you put all the effort into the contract and then turning it on and then rolling it out and the training everyone, but it doesn't actually solve the problem you're looking to solve, you've just wasted a lot of people's time and a lot of your own money, right? So rather than, saying, oh, this is shiny and new and I think it'll help, actually solve the problem, right? And it's pretty easy to pick out a software that was made by someone who is in the industry, usually to solve their own problem, compared to somebody who's from outside of the industry and they're like, oh, I came up with this neat solution and maybe I can sell it to those in multifamily. Pretty easy to pick those out. I would say talk to other people, other operators, friends that you have through associations or you've been at trade shows, having this issue. Have you found anything that can help work towards solving this issue? And read a whole lot, go to Revise, listen to podcasts. There's a lot of information out there with really good reviews and transparent pricing and, access the information that's there so that you can make sure that the software that you're turning on is the right software to meet your need.
I think along with that is you have to understand your user base. We have a couple managers who are I'll call them super techie. This tech doesn't scare them. Just hand it to me. I'm going to figure it out myself, and I want to play with it. And we have others that would rather go collect money than play with technology. And they don't like technology. They're afraid of it, and they're going to adopt it at different levels. One of the issues that we have worked really hard to deal with is shadow systems, where there's a main system. And then there's everybody's workarounds to the main system. So you end up with data in multiple places, or one place doing it one way and another place doing it another way, and really needing to insist we want one source of truth in our data, not multiple systems. And then, people learn differently, especially, depending on their age and generation. My generation was, computers were just coming out. I had date myself. I had a Commodore PET computer back, when they had the Radio Shack TRS-80, the Trash 80, and we learned BASIC, and that was computing. David and his generation were technology natives. They don't know a world, probably even without an iPhone.
2007
was the so they don't know a world that exists before the technology. So when you have a legacy system or methodology and now you're bringing the tech in, the old guard isn't going to want to let go of what feels comfortable. And then you'll end up doing twice the work. So sort of meeting people where they are and realizing what your sort of overall capabilities are to deal with technology. We've tried to actually slow down a lot. We don't want to be bleeding edge. We try and be sort of just behind cutting edge. And not introducing a new software every week, because that drives people nuts. I think we've scaled it back to maybe 2 major software things in a year, because people they need time to get used to it. And if you've ever changed property management softwares, they all do basically the same thing, but they do it in a different way, and the reports are called different things. And there's nothing more frustrating than a new software. It's like, I just want to find this report, but there's 400 reports and I don't know how to find, I don't know which one they call it. That's just so frustrating and slows things down so much.
You just hit on not only talking on what does the resident actually need, what is the ownership and management need, and then what is the process for onboarding people, right? You have too much software, can't handle it. I can't eat that much at once.
Right.
And I think one of the cool things, about your background is, your experience in like the EV Electric Vehicle Association and sustainability focused initiatives. So I was kind of curious because obviously we all know Brendan Wallace at Fifth Wall, and he's posting every day prop tech and about the move towards sustainability. Like sustainability isn't an option anymore. It's now being implemented by law. It's now having a major impact. And oh, by the way, you could save money. Also, Chris Sacca, Lower Carbon Capital. That's his entire thesis, is that, you can utilize technology to drive down cost, but it can also be better for the planet, but also better for the pocketbook. So I want to get your take, as you said, you have to be very careful about being too bleeding edge. How do you balance that with sustainability or ESG? And how are you thinking about that?
So we did one of our sites a couple of years ago. We changed out all of the incandescent hallway light fixtures to LED. And there was basically a rebate program through our local utility, National Grid, and they covered almost like 80% of the cost and did all of the work to do that for us, which was fantastic because it was like overdue that it was time to switch out these older light fixtures. And doing so reduced our electric bill pretty significantly, over the course of a year. It was easily $20,000, $30,000 less just for the one property, just for the house accounts. And all of those kinds of programs, whether it be low flow shower heads or water heaters or pipe wraps or LED lighting upgrades or even EV charging, there's incentives out there. There's federal incentives, there's state incentives, there's lots of it out there. So absolutely it's the right thing to do, but there's the environment, but also for the bottom line. And if you look at today's renter, it's mostly millennial, Gen Z, and soon enough Gen Y. And those people are very concerned about the environment. 1 in 5 new cars sold is an electric vehicle. So if you have 5, 6 apartment communities to choose from as a renter, and you have an electric vehicle, and only one of those communities has an EV charger, the choice is pretty clear, right? I can just charge right at home. It's not an inconvenience to my life. And, so anything that you can do to be a differentiator, to try to grab a specific niche or a market share, do it. Absolutely. I am a big part of the Electric Vehicle Association. Very proud of that. Have a cool car, and it's a fun thing to do. I haven't bought gas in 4 years, 5 years at this point. So why not?
So that's the younger generation take on it. The older generation take on it is you also have to balance these things. And while they may lower operating costs, you can take a pretty significant hit in the capital side of the column. So you have to look at the whole picture and plan these things out carefully and see where it's going to make the most sense. The places that I've done particularly well at, or where you can get the most bang for your buck, is a property that might be older or run down. So the where we did the LED lamps,
It's time to do it anyway.
we needed to change the fixtures anyway because they were broken and we couldn't get parts and everything else. So we were going to spend the money on the capital side of things regardless. This was an added benefit and an easier sell to the ownership. We also gotten involved in hotels. So we're in the middle of a construction project and we didn't want to change the PTAC, the heating ventilation units in the rooms, because it's, an extra $130,000 on already bloated, and growing budget. But, we said we're replacing everything else. These are going to die in the next 5 years, even if they are working today. And because they're so old, we should get a pretty good reduction in our costs by upgrading them. So, we're always looking at that. When we took over our first major property, they were having a huge turnover. It was 250 units, and they were experiencing 75% a year turnover. And we obviously needed to get that down. That's this market, we're typically aiming for a 35% turnover. We did it with lease incentives, which, included redoing a bathroom, changing a sink, changing a pedestal sink to a vanity sink. But in doing that, we also were able to take 50-year-old faucets and put in low flow faucets and put in the low flow shower heads and massively impact the water bill. And then fast forward 20 years, because of some of these new rent regulations and the potential for capping the rents, which this particular city just did, they're capping rent increases. We separated out the water and put water submeters to each apartment. And now the water is no longer part of the rent. They pay for their usage. And our water bill went down by 30% just because now they're getting a metered bill versus it being included in the rent. So I think it's important not to just go for that, hey, because there's an incentive and we can do it fancy new. That's great in a brand new property when you're choosing that material to start with, or you're speccing that way. But you have to be careful how you go about that in an existing property or an older property, and make sure you're getting the bang for the buck.
Now, the question is for both of you. So I'm going to start with you, Jesse. So it's the same question for both. Working together as father and son in such a competitive industry like multifamily, how do you balance different viewpoints while maintaining a cohesive strategic vision for your companies?
So, any family business is a challenge. There's ups and downs. There's different points of view. So, everybody's got to bring something to the table, and, it has to be a right fit overall. And that changes over time. Also, what's right today may not be right tomorrow. There may be opportunities that people want to take advantage of, etc. And you have to be willing to be honest with each other and say that sort of family business, and quite frankly, any partnerships are always a challenge that way. I've always kind of prided myself as at least being willing to listen to the younger members of my staff and the people that work with me. I like hearing new ideas. I like challenging the status quo and trying new things. Not everybody does. I tend to be more open to whether it was David or Adam or any of my younger staff who came at it differently, to be open to their ideas. That being said, they also had to be willing to say their piece and know that we might not act on it or we might not like it. A big one right now, and it's a challenge we've had, let's take texting. So we do not allow texting in our company with any of our residents, employee to resident,
employee to prospect,
or employee to prospect, because automatically now that's on their cell phone, there's no hour boundary, we have no record of it. People say things that they shouldn't say. So while the younger generation just wants to text away at it, we won't let them do it. And that's just a hard and fast rule, because we've been burned that way before. And pretty much every younger member of my staff who has tried it, when they start getting text by a pissed off tenant at 11 o'clock, 1 o'clock in the morning, they realize why we tell them, don't give out your cell phone number and don't text people.
Yeah.
So, but sometimes they got to learn the hard way first. That's one example. But we were also able to use their superpowers. So, when we bought into new software, the focus was on, all right, we have a very short window to get this up and running, because we're still flying the plane. We don't have a lot of time to build it. So we spent all of our time getting it operational, and nobody had the time or the patience or the intuition to sort of go back through, and you don't even get a manual anymore. Watch the videos and look at all the cool things and all the possibilities that this software can do. And David and Adam were interested enough and curious enough to really look at what the software could do, look at all the bells and whistles and add-ons and choices and customization, so that we're I don't know that we're even getting 100% of the value out of the software yet, but maybe we were at 60% when we started, and now maybe we're up to 85% of the value of what it can be done.
Yeah.
It's balancing what it can do with what your philosophy is and what you should do. So yeah, I can make the system automatically respond to every email with information about the apartment, but I actually want my rental agent to talk to, not text, talk to a prospect and ask them questions and start that relationship with them.
Yeah.
Not just throw information at them. It's what are you looking for in an apartment? Where do you need to be? What's important to you? Because that then, informs the showing, informs, whether a potential referral. Sometimes it's hard to get the younger generation to buy in that. They just, I don't need to talk to people. I can just send them an email. It's like, no, you got to actually pick up the phone and talk to people, because in an email and a text, you can't get tone. You can't get inflection. You can't hear the stress in their voice that doesn't come out, that you just still need to deal with.
How about you, Dave?
And sometimes they listen to me.
So I've been behind the snowblower and and behind the spreadsheet. So it's everyone's you gotta earn everyone's trust. If you come in and say, "Oh, family business," and I'm greater than, and no one's gonna respect that. So start with respect. Give respect to everyone. And
How about you, Dave? The listening part. How often do you listen to that? And how is this dynamic, father-son dynamic at work? And then, how does that work? How do you integrate that with life?
Interesting thing that happened with the other employees of the company, because prior to my brother and I getting involved, it was a fully, up and running operational company for 20 plus years. And then it was all of a sudden a family business. So, my brother Adam and I came in at this kind of disadvantage because everyone's watching and everyone says, oh, they're the sons of the owner. So they're not going to be held to the same standards and they're going to get skirted through it, yada, yada. And we kind of had to, obviously we had to earn our keep. You go and spend time on the maintenance team and do what they do and spend time in the years in the office and, learn and grow. And,
we made them start from the ground up.
True.
And you got to have the capacity to do that and the ability to do that, which we were blessed enough to have. Because I think you get a very different perspective when you're the guy shoveling the snow and you're the guy talking to the tenant and you're the guy getting your hands dirty. It just gives you a very different appreciation for people, for what people do. Like I said, we got into hotels and my top guy and I went and we did a housekeeping shift, changing sheets and cleaning rooms, and it gave me a completely different appreciation for what those housekeepers go through. And physically, I couldn't do it. I made one bed and I was done, and they got to do 8 to 10 a day. They let me dust. They said, yeah, you've done enough with that. You should go away, get out of our way. We got work to do.
Yep. So I've been behind the snowblower and, and behind the spreadsheet. So it's everyone's you got to earn everyone's trust. If you come in and say, oh, family business and I'm greater than, and, no one's going to respect that. So start with respect, give respect to everyone and show that you have a right to be there, I suppose, from my perspective. And then we had to figure out the whole name thing, right? Is he Dad? Is he Jesse? So we came up with this at work or during work hours, he's Jesse. And after hours, if we're having dinner or whatever, he's Dad. And after 8+ years of that, I think I just call you Jesse now pretty much all the time. Had to figure that out.
Awesome. Well, you may hear my son in the background. Speaking of daddy's son, so I hear him downstairs. I want to get your thoughts as you talked about, obviously we've got incredible data, and it used to just be boots in the units, right? And now it's data, it's integration. You've got all the types of software. You've got software and hardware reading and making decisions at your properties. So how do you think about data? How do you think about integrations and maybe how do you think about making data informed decisions at your companies?
Sure. All right, I'll take this one. So this is where Property Gauge comes in, right? So there's a ton of data out there, and generally most operators don't have time to look at it, to figure out which pieces of data are something that you really need to go do something about right now because they're so busy responding to what's blowing up or what's currently, going on at the site. And when we implemented Property Gauge and we started looking at things by looking at the leading indicators, right? I can prevent a month-to-month tenancy if I'm just, making sure that the staff is getting back the lease renewal on time or even sending out the lease renewal on time. And then when there's less people that are suddenly becoming month to month because nobody caught that the lease was ending, is less of an urgent problem that I need to deal with. And, that big blow up was prevented. And we're trying to do that in every aspect, from leasing up, collections, budget, maintenance, work orders, turnovers, everything that we can try to prevent a bigger problem. We're trying to do that. And suddenly you've prevented enough big problems that life just becomes a lot easier. It's a lot less stressful. You can keep the work hours to 9 to 5, ideally. The furnace doesn't fail at 3 a.m. in the winter because you did the preventative maintenance to make sure that the furnace filter was switched every 3 to 6 months, depending upon, So with having less urgent issues, you can kind of relax a little bit, and you can say that we're okay now.
We can be proactive instead of
reactive.
reactive.
Correct.
Right.
So,
So a great example is, these separate water meters. Great system. It even tells us the temperature of the water, and it can send us an alert if the temperature goes too low to prevent, something from freezing.
pipe burst, yeah.
Right. But we realized, we can see the water usage, and if we put some statistics around the water usage, we can see somebody who is out of whack with everybody else. Now, when you're too busy and you're billing these people for it, and it all bills automatically, when do you hear about that? Well, when they get a bill that's twice what they expected, and you go, oh, I don't know. And then we go look for the leak, but that bill's out there because the money's been spent. But if you're looking at the statistics and you're looking at the water flows and you go, oh, hey, this guy is way out of whack. Let's go send somebody to go look for the leak before they get the bill, right? Now we saved on water. We didn't piss off the tenant. We don't have a bill. We don't have to pay for the water that got wasted. We don't have to give them a credit or wait for them to pay us. Everybody wins. That's the kind of management we want to practice. That's the kind of company we want to be, and that's the kind of customer service experience we want to deliver, which we can from some of this data. We played some with other data to see if we could correlate the amount of the rent with the number of work orders and see if there was any connection. And I can tell you there was absolutely no connection whatsoever. However, we found 2 out of 200 units. Most units had 2 to 5 work orders in a year, but we found 2 of them that had 25 or 30 work orders in those units. So all right, what's going on there?
Yeah.
That these units have this many work orders. And that clued us in on, I believe one of them was a child who kept ripping the bathroom door off the wall. And, we were able to go to the tenant and say, look, we fixed this, a dozen times. The next one you're going to pay for because this is not usual. This is not okay.
Yeah. Never happened again.
Never happened again.
Yeah.
Now they put, they got the kid under control and he stopped ripping the door off. So, those are when things are stable, you can do those more proactive things.
Yeah.
And spend the time to, speak with the tenant and create the relationship and not just process paper and hide in an office.
Gentlemen, as we approach the end of this amazing conversation, there's one thing that, I'm contemplating a lot. I'm thinking about a lot, right? And that's legacy. It'll be very interesting to get both of your takes on legacy. How would you like to be remembered when it's all said and done? And Jesse, I'm going to start with you.
I want him to say he was an awesome guy. I find that it was actually a quote I put in LinkedIn today. People don't care what you know until they know that you care. I care a great deal about our staff and the experience that they have. I care about our residents and our customers, that, we're delivering a top rate experience, and that, there's a lot of bad stuff going on in the world, and it's all of our responsibility to try and make everybody's world just a little bit brighter and a little bit easier and a little bit nicer when we have the opportunity.
How about you, Dave?
I'm trying to raise the bar. The industry standard, when people think about the landlord, is the slumlord, and the unethical operator. And I'm trying to be out there and involved in professional associations and giving back to the industry and say, look, we're as an industry trying to do it right, trying to be ethical operators and play by the rules and make sure this is a good environment, that it's a health and safe and happy home for you and your family, and you're renting because you choose to and not because you have to, and we're doing the property management as a job because we choose to, and it's not this tenuous relationship between the tenant and the slumlord. It's just the resident and the property manager, and it's much more of a respectful place to be. So that's my goal. Raise the bar a little.
Chris Moreno, any final thoughts?
I love it. Father, son, team. unstoppable. 2, just raise the bar, focus on retention, focus on your customer. The takeaway is, how do you help the customer? How do you have them help them in their life? It's so important. If you get that right, you're doing things well. And to your legacy point, So I loved it. Appreciate you guys for coming on, and can't wait to see you guys soon, either in New York. Are you going to be at Blueprint coming up soon, or any other conferences?
We'll be at the IREM Global Summit in October. That'll be the Indianapolis, Indiana. Jesse will be there as a speaker, and I'll be there as a finalist for the Remy Award for CPM of the Year, which is fantastic.
Awesome.
And we're already going to be scheduled for Apartmentalize, which is next year in Vegas. So you can catch us there.
In June.
In June, yep. And for anyone who's interested in learning more about Property Gauge, we'd love to connect on LinkedIn. And you can visit our website to have a kind of a one-on-one demo. We'll be happy to talk about it and see if we can help you out at all.
German, great having you here today. Amazing conversation. Thank you for hanging out with us this afternoon. I want to thank our sponsors, Kairos and Coastal Painting Contractors, for making this broadcast possible. I'm your host right here with Chris Moreno, my co-host. We wish you an amazing afternoon, and we hope to see you next Thursday, 3 p.m. Eastern Time. Chris Moreno, why don't you introduce our upcoming guest?
Okay. So next week, we have a gentleman by the name of Jay Sheminsky. I've known Jay over 20 years, incredible friend and confidant, and he knows real estate. He was born in it. So, similar to this is good discussion, but he went from just storage facilities to now over 5,000 units of multifamily in commercial and you name it. So it's going to be a really exciting story to hear. They're more on the investment side and really interested to hear about their development and how they approach technology. So looking forward to it next week.
Definitely looking forward to it. Thank you all for watching us today. See you next Thursday, 3 p.m. Eastern Time as always. Have an amazing afternoon.